Have you ever felt like your heart was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces, like the weight of everything you're carrying is just too much for your soul to bear? I want you to pause right here, right now, because this moment wasn't an accident. You didn't stumble upon this message by chance. Something deep inside your spirit led you here today, and I believe with everything in me that God has a word specifically for your heart. Maybe you woke up this morning feeling empty, drained, like you're running on fumes and there's nothing left in the tank. Maybe you've been fighting battles that nobody else can see, carrying burdens that feel heavier with each passing day. Or perhaps you're standing at a crossroads, unsure of which direction to take, and your heart is crying out for strength, for guidance, for just a whisper of hope. Here's what I know to be true, and I need you to let this sink deep into your spirit. When you pray first, everything changes. Not maybe, not sometimes. Everything changes. And today we're going to discover exactly how God wants to strengthen your heart through the power of prayer that comes before everything else. But before we dive into this life-changing truth, let me share something with you that will revolutionize how you see prayer. Most people think prayer is something you do when you're desperate, when you've exhausted all your options, when you've tried everything else and nothing worked. They treat prayer like a last resort, like spiritual emergency room where you go when life is falling apart. That's completely backwards. Prayer isn't your last resort. Prayer is your first response. Prayer isn't what you do when you're weak. Prayer is what makes you strong. And when you learn to pray first, before you worry, before you panic, before you try to figure everything out on your own, that's when you tap into a strength that the world cannot understand. I'm going to walk you through 7 powerful truths about praying first that will absolutely transform your heart. We're going to uncover why this simple shift in your daily routine can be the difference between living in constant anxiety and walking in unshakable peace. We're going to explore how praying first doesn't just change your circumstances, it changes you from the inside out. And here's what makes this even more incredible. I've spent years studying not just what the Bible says about prayer, but I've walked alongside thousands of believers who've discovered this truth. I've seen marriages restored, financial breakthroughs happen, health miracles manifest, and broken hearts made whole, all because someone learned the power of praying first. You see, there's something supernatural that happens when you give God the first moments of your day, the first response to your crisis, the first words of your mouth before you speak to anyone else. It's like you're aligning your entire being with heaven's frequency. You're positioning your heart to receive strength that doesn't come from your own willpower or determination, but flows directly from the throne of grace. Think about it this way. When your phone battery is dying, what do? You don't wait until it's completely dead. You don't try to make more battery appear out of thin air. You plug it into a power source. That's exactly what prayer does for your heart. It plugs you into the ultimate power source, the source of all strength, all peace, all hope. But here's where most people miss it. They wait until their spiritual battery is at 1% before they think about plugging in. They wait until they're emotionally drained, mentally exhausted, spiritually depleted. Then they wonder why prayer feels difficult, why it feels like their words are bouncing off the ceiling, why they don't sense God's presence. When you pray first, you're not coming to God from a place of desperation, you're coming from a place of wisdom. You're not begging God to fix what's broken. You're positioning yourself to receive the strength you need before you even face the challenges of the day. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine 2 people facing the exact same difficult situation. Person A wakes up, immediately checks their phone, reads the news, gets anxious about their problems, tries to solve everything in their own strength, gets frustrated when nothing works, and finally, at the end of the day, collapses into bed and whispers a desperate prayer for help. Person B wakes up, and before their feet hit the floor, before they check their phone, before they think about their to-do list, they spend time in prayer. They surrender their day to God, they ask for His strength, they align their heart with His will. Then they face the exact same challenging situation that person A faced. Who do you think is better equipped to handle whatever comes their way? Who do you think has more peace in their heart? Who do you think makes better decisions under pressure? The answer is obvious, but here's what's not so obvious. The only difference between these 2 people is the order of their priorities. This isn't about being super spiritual or having more time than everyone else. This isn't about praying for hours or using fancy religious words. This is about understanding a fundamental spiritual principle that can revolutionize your entire life. When you put God first, He makes sure you have everything you need to face whatever comes next. And I want you to know that God isn't waiting for you to get your act together before you pray. He isn't waiting for you to clean up your life or figure out all your problems. He's waiting for you right now, exactly as you are, with all your fears and doubts and questions, to come to Him first. Here's what's beautiful about this truth. Praying first isn't just about getting things from God, although He absolutely wants to bless you and provide for you. Praying first is about getting more of God Himself. It's about allowing His strength to become your strength, His peace to guard your heart, His wisdom to guide your decisions. When you pray first, you're essentially saying, God, I can't do this day without you. I don't want to try to figure this out on my own. I need your strength in my heart, your wisdom in my mind, your peace in my spirit. And when you approach life from that posture of dependence and trust, something supernatural happens in your heart. The anxiety that used to consume your thoughts begins to fade. The fear that used to paralyze you starts to lose its grip. The overwhelming sense that you have to carry everything on your own shoulders begins to lift. Why? Because you've tapped into a source of strength that never runs dry, never gets depleted, never fails you when you need it most. But let me be real with you for a moment. Learning to pray first isn't always easy, especially in our culture that tells us to be self-sufficient, to have all the answers, to never show weakness. There might be mornings when you wake up and your mind immediately starts racing with all the things you need to do. There might be crisis moments when your first instinct is to panic or try to control the situation. That's normal. That's human. But here's the incredible thing about God. He's not frustrated with you when you forget to pray first. He's not keeping score of how many times you get it right versus how many times you mess up. He's simply waiting with open arms, ready to strengthen your heart the moment you turn to Him. And this brings us to something absolutely crucial that most people don't understand about prayer. Prayer isn't a religious duty you have to perform to earn God's favor. Prayer is an invitation into relationship with the Creator of the universe. It's God saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." When you pray first, you're not trying to impress God with your spirituality. You're not trying to convince Him to care about your problems. You're simply accepting His invitation to bring everything to Him, knowing that He already cares more about your heart than you could ever imagine. This is where the real transformation begins. As you start making prayer your first response instead of your last resort, you'll begin to notice changes in your heart that you never thought possible. The things that used to trigger intense anxiety will start to feel manageable. The relationships that used to drain your energy will begin to shift. The decisions that used to keep you up at night will become clearer. Why does this happen? Because when you consistently connect with God first, His strength literally begins to flow into the deepest parts of your heart. His peace starts to guard your emotions. His wisdom begins to guide your thoughts. His love starts to heal the broken places you didn't even know existed. Think of it like a river that's been dammed up for years. When you remove the dam, the water doesn't just trickle out slowly. It rushes forth with power and life, transforming everything in its path. That's what happens when you remove the barriers between your heart and God's strength through the practice of praying first. And here's what I want you to understand about the barriers that might be holding you back from this life-changing practice. Maybe you're thinking, I've tried praying before, and it didn't seem to work. I still faced hardships. I still struggled. I still felt weak. I hear you, and I want to address this head-on because this misconception keeps so many people from experiencing the fullness of what God wants to do in their hearts. Praying first doesn't mean you'll never face challenges. It doesn't mean life will suddenly become easy, or that all your problems will disappear overnight. What it means is that you'll face those challenges with a heart that's been strengthened by the presence of Almighty God. You'll walk through difficulties with a peace that doesn't make sense to the natural mind. You'll have access to wisdom that goes beyond your own understanding. Let me tell you about Sarah, a single mother I met who was drowning in financial stress, working 2 jobs and barely making ends meet. Every morning she would wake up in a panic, immediately checking her bank account, calculating bills, spiraling into anxiety about how she was going to provide for her children. The weight on her heart was crushing her spirit day by day. Then someone shared with her this simple truth about praying first. She was skeptical, honestly. How could 5 minutes of prayer change her impossible financial situation? But she was desperate enough to try anything. So she began waking up 15 minutes earlier each day, not to check her phone or worry about her problems, but to pour her heart out to God. Something remarkable began to happen. Not overnight, but gradually her heart started to change. The panic attacks stopped. The overwhelming fear began to subside. She started making better decisions with her money because she wasn't operating from a place of anxiety anymore. Opportunities began to open up that she hadn't noticed before because she was so consumed with worry. Within 6 months, she had received a promotion at one of her jobs, found a more affordable apartment, and discovered community resources she never knew existed. But here's the most beautiful part of her story. She told me that even if none of those external circumstances had changed, she would still pray first every single day because of how it transformed her heart. That's the power we're talking about. That's what happens when you learn to draw strength from the well that never runs dry. Now I want to share with you the first of 7 life-changing truths about praying first, and this one alone could revolutionize everything about how you approach each day. Are you ready for this? Here it is. When you pray first, you invite God's perspective into your problems before your emotions take control. Think about what happens when you wake up and immediately start thinking about everything that's wrong, everything you're worried about, everything you need to figure out. Your emotions hijack your thoughts. Fear starts driving your decisions. Anxiety begins dictating your responses. By the time you finally think about praying, you're already operating from a place of emotional chaos. But when you pray first, you're essentially saying, God, before I let my emotions tell me how big my problems are, I want your perspective on this situation. Before I let fear convince me that I'm all alone, I want to remember that you are with me. Before I let anxiety steal my peace, I want to rest in your promises. This isn't about denying your emotions or pretending everything is fine when it's not. This is about getting God's viewpoint on your circumstances before your circumstances overwhelm your heart. When you see your situation through God's eyes, instead of through the lens of fear, everything shifts. Your problems don't disappear, but they stop looking insurmountable. Your challenges don't vanish, but they stop defining your identity. Your pain doesn't go away immediately, but it stops convincing you that this is all there is, that there's no hope, that things will never change. I remember a man named David who came to me absolutely broken after losing his job of 20 years. He felt like a complete failure, like he had let his family down, like his best days were behind him. Every morning he would wake up consumed with shame and fear about the future. His heart was so heavy he could barely function. When he started praying first each morning, something powerful began to shift. Instead of waking up to immediate thoughts of failure and fear, he would spend time reminding himself of who God said he was. Instead of focusing on what he had lost, he began asking God to show him what might be possible. Instead of being paralyzed by uncertainty, he started taking steps forward with confidence that God was directing his path. It took 8 months, but he eventually found a position that not only paid better than his previous job, but also allowed him to use gifts and talents he had forgotten he possessed. But just like Sarah, he told me that the real miracle wasn't the new job. The real miracle was how praying first had strengthened his heart to believe again, to hope again, to trust that his story wasn't over. This brings us to the second transformational truth. When you pray first, you access supernatural strength for natural challenges. Your problems are real, but go you're facing. God's power is greater than anything. Struggles are valid, but his strength is sufficient for whatever you're going through. Here's what most people don't realize about strength. We think strength means never feeling weak, never struggling, never facing difficulties. But biblical strength is different. Biblical strength is having the power to keep going when everything in you wants to give up. It's having peace in the middle of chaos. It's having hope when circumstances look hopeless. When you pray first, you're not asking God to remove every challenge from your life. You're asking him to fill your heart with the kind of strength that can handle whatever comes your way. You're requesting access to a power source that doesn't depend on your circumstances, your feelings, or your ability to figure everything out. I think about the woman at the well in John chapter 4. She had been married 5 times and was living with a man who wasn't her husband. Can you imagine the shame she carried, the rejection she felt, the weight on her heart from all the broken, all the failed relationships, the attempts at finding love and security? But when she encountered Jesus, everything changed. Not because her circumstances immediately transformed, but because her heart was strengthened by the truth of who she was in God's eyes. She went from hiding in shame to boldly sharing her testimony with an entire town. She went from feeling worthless to knowing she was loved unconditionally. That same strength is available to you right now. That same transformation is possible for your heart. When you learn to pray first, you're positioning yourself to receive the supernatural strength that enabled that woman to go from hiding to proclaiming, from shame to boldness, from despair to hope. The third truth that will change everything is this: when you pray first, you align your will with God's perfect plan for your day. So many of us start each morning with our own agenda, our own expectations, our own ideas about how things should go. Then, when life doesn't cooperate with our plans, we get frustrated, anxious, and overwhelmed. But when you pray first, you're essentially saying, God, I trust that your plan for this day is better than mine. I surrender my agenda to your will. I align my heart with your purposes. This doesn't make you passive or irresponsible. It makes you flexible and open to the opportunities and blessings that God wants to bring into your life. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs in our lives come not from our carefully crafted plans, but from moments when we surrender our agenda and trust that God sees what we cannot see. When you align your will with His perfect plan through prayer, you open your heart to possibilities you never could have imagined on your own. I remember meeting a woman named Grace who had her entire life mapped out. She knew exactly what job she wanted, what city she'd live in, even what kind of house she'd buy. But when she started praying first each morning, asking God to direct her steps instead of demanding He bless her plans, everything began to shift in the most beautiful way. The job she thought she wanted fell through, and initially she was devastated. But because she had been praying first, seeking God's will above her own, she remained open to other possibilities. Within weeks, an opportunity presented itself that she never would have considered before. It required her to move to a different state, take a significant pay cut initially, and step completely outside her comfort zone. But here's what's incredible. That detour led her to meet her future husband, discover a passion she didn't know existed, and eventually build a business that far exceeded anything she could have achieved following her original plan. When I asked her what made the difference, she said it was learning to pray first and trust that God's vision for her life was bigger and better than anything she could design herself. This is what happens when you align your will with God's perfect plan. You stop fighting against doors that are closing and start walking through the ones He's opening. You stop trying to force outcomes and start flowing with His purposes. You stop being frustrated when things don't go according to your timeline and start being excited about what He might have in store. The fourth life-changing truth about praying first is this: when you pray first, you break the cycle of worry before it begins. Worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And for so many of us, worry has become our default response to uncertainty. We wake up and immediately start mentally rehearsing everything that could go wrong, playing out worst-case scenarios, creating anxiety about situations that may never even happen. But when you pray first, you interrupt that cycle before it gains momentum. Instead of letting your mind spiral into what-if thinking, you ground your heart in what is thinking. What is true about God's character? What is promised in His word? What is available to you through His strength? Let me share something profound that happens in your brain when you worry versus when you pray. Neuroscience shows us that worry activates the fear center of your brain, flooding your system with stress hormones that cloud your judgment and weaken your emotional resilience. But prayer activates the peace centers of your brain, releasing chemicals that promote calm, clarity, and emotional stability. This isn't just spiritual truth, it's scientific reality. When you pray first, you're literally rewiring your brain for strength instead of stress, for peace instead of panic, for trust instead of trauma response. I think about Martha in the Bible, who was worried and troubled about many things while her sister Mary sat at Jesus' feet. Martha wasn't wrong for wanting to serve or take care of practical matters, but her worry was stealing her peace and preventing her from receiving what she really needed. When Jesus gently corrected her, He wasn't criticizing her heart. He was showing her a better way to handle life's demands. Mary had chosen to put relationship with Jesus first, to seek His presence before tackling her responsibilities. And Jesus said that was the one thing that was needful, the one thing that couldn't be taken away from her. When you pray first, you're making Mary's choice. You're saying that connecting with God, drawing strength from His presence and anchoring your heart in His truth is more important than immediately jumping into the chaos of your day. You're choosing the one thing that truly matters, the one thing that will sustain you through everything else. The fifth transformational truth is this: when you pray first, you activate divine protection over your heart and mind. The Bible tells us that the peace of God will guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. The word guard in the original language is a military term that means to keep watch, to protect like a sentinel standing guard at a post. When you pray first, you're essentially posting God's peace as a guardian over your heart. You're asking His presence to filter what gets access to your emotions, your thoughts, your responses. This doesn't mean you become emotionally numb or disconnected from reality. It means you become emotionally stable and grounded in truth. Think about what happens when you don't have this protection in place. Every negative thought finds easy entry into your mind. Every fearful possibility feels equally likely to happen. Every criticism cuts deeply into your heart. Every setback feels like evidence that things will never get better. But when you pray first and activate divine protection, something remarkable happens. Negative thoughts still come, but they don't stick. Fearful possibilities still present themselves, but they don't paralyze you. Criticism still exists, but it doesn't define you. Setbacks still occur, but they don't devastate you. I met a teacher named Michael who was struggling with severe anxiety about his performance at work. Every morning he would wake up dreading the day, convinced that he was failing his students, that parents were complaining about him, that his principal was looking for reasons to let him go. These thoughts would consume his mind from the moment he woke up until he fell asleep at night. When he started praying first each morning, asking God to guard his heart and mind, the change was gradual but profound. Those anxious thoughts still tried to intrude, but they no longer had the power to spiral him into panic. He began to see his students' progress more clearly, instead of focusing only on the challenges. He started receiving the encouragement that had always been there, but that his anxiety had filtered out. By the end of the school year, not only had his anxiety significantly decreased, but he had also been nominated for Teacher of the Year by his colleagues. The external circumstances hadn't dramatically changed, but his heart had been protected from the lies that were stealing his peace and confidence. This brings us to the sixth powerful truth. When you pray first, you position yourself to hear God's voice above all other voices. In our world, we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us who we should be, what we should want, how we should feel about our circumstances. Social media voices, cultural voices, internal voices of shame and fear, all competing for our attention and allegiance. But when you pray first, you create space for the one voice that matters most. You quiet the noise long enough to hear the gentle whisper of your Father's heart. You position yourself to receive His truth about your identity, your situation, your future. This isn't about hearing audible voices or having mystical experiences, though God can certainly communicate in supernatural ways. This is about developing spiritual sensitivity to recognize God's voice through His Word, through His peace, through the gentle promptings of His Spirit in your heart. When you consistently pray first, you begin to distinguish between the voice of fear and the voice of faith, between the voice of condemnation and the voice of conviction, between the voice of the world and the voice of your Creator. This discernment becomes one of your greatest assets in navigating life's complexities. I remember a businessman named Robert who was facing a critical decision about whether to accept a lucrative job offer that would require his family to relocate. On paper, it looked like an incredible opportunity. More money, better benefits, career advancement. Everyone around him was encouraging him to take it, but when he prayed first each morning, seeking God's guidance about this decision, something in his spirit felt unsettled. The more he prayed, the more convinced he became that this wasn't the right move for his family, despite how good it looked on the surface. He declined the offer, much to the confusion of his friends and colleagues. 6 months later, the company that had made the offer went through massive layoffs, and the position he would have taken was eliminated. Meanwhile, a local opportunity opened up that allowed him to advance in his career while keeping his family and the community they loved. When you pray first and learn to hear God's voice, you gain access to wisdom and insight that goes beyond human understanding. You begin to make decisions based on divine guidance rather than just natural reasoning. You start to trust that the one who sees the end from the beginning has your best interests at heart. The seventh and final transformational truth is this: when you pray first, you become a conduit of God's strength to others. Here's something beautiful about receiving strength from God through prayer. It doesn't just benefit you. When your heart is strengthened by His presence, you become a source of strength and encouragement to everyone around you. Think about it. When you're operating from a place of divine strength rather than human striving, when your heart is anchored in God's peace rather than tossed by circumstances, when your mind is focused on His promises rather than consumed with problems, you naturally become a light in dark places for other people. People begin to notice something different about you. They see that you handle pressure differently. They observe that you respond to crisis with unusual calm. They witness that you maintain hope when others are losing heart. And they start asking questions about the source of your strength. This is how revival spreads, how communities are transformed, how families are healed, not through complex programs or perfect presentations, but through ordinary people who have learned to draw extraordinary strength from prayer and then overflow that strength to others. I think about a nurse named Patricia who worked in the ICU during the height of the pandemic. The stress, the long hours, the constant exposure to suffering and death, it was overwhelming for everyone on her unit. Many of her colleagues were burning out, experiencing anxiety and depression, struggling to cope with the emotional weight of their work. But Patricia had been practicing praying first for years. Every morning before her shift, she would spend time in prayer, asking God to strengthen her heart for whatever she would face that day, to fill her with His peace and compassion. What happened next was remarkable. Her colleagues began to notice that she carried herself differently. She remained calm in emergency situations. She showed unusual kindness to difficult patients and families. She encouraged her co-workers when they were struggling. Soon, other nurses were coming to her, asking for prayer, seeking her counsel, drawing strength from the strength that God had given her. By the end of that difficult season, Patricia had become an unofficial chaplain to her unit. She had led several colleagues to faith in Christ. She had helped restore marriages that were struggling under the pressure. She had been instrumental in creating a support group for healthcare workers that continued long after the crisis had passed. None of this happened because she was particularly gifted or talented. It happened because she understood the power of praying first and allowing God's strength to flow through her to others. This is what becomes possible when you make prayer your first priority instead of your last resort. This is how your strengthened heart becomes a blessing not just to you, but to your family, your community, your workplace, everyone whose life intersects with yours. But here's what I want you to understand about implementing this in your own life. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to pray for hours. You don't have to use sophisticated religious language. You just need to be genuine, consistent, and willing to put God first. Maybe you start with just 5 minutes each morning before you check your phone or start your routine. Maybe you begin by simply saying, God, I need your strength today. I can't do this without you. Please fill my heart with your peace and guide my steps. That's enough. That's more than enough. The key is consistency, not perfection. The goal is relationship, not performance. The purpose is to strengthen your heart through connection with the source of all strength, not to impress anyone with your spirituality. As you begin this journey of praying first, expect your heart to change. Expect your perspective to shift. Expect your responses to difficult situations to become more measured and peaceful. Expect to discover reserves of strength you didn't know you possessed, but also expect resistance. There will be mornings when you don't feel like praying. There will be crisis moments when your first instinct is still to panic rather than pray. There will be times when you forget and fall back into old patterns. When that happens, don't condemn yourself. Don't quit. Just begin again. God's mercies are new every morning, and His strength is available to you every moment of every day. He's not keeping score of your failures. He's celebrating every step you take toward Him. Remember, this isn't about earning God's love or approval. You already have that through Christ. This isn't about proving your worth or demonstrating your spirituality. This is simply about positioning your heart to receive the strength that God is already eager to give you. As we near the end of our time together, I want you to know that everything I've shared with you today comes from both biblical truth and personal experience. I've walked through seasons where prayer felt like a duty, where I struggled to find time or motivation to seek God first. But I've also experienced the incredible transformation that happens when you learn to draw your strength from the well that never runs dry. There have been mornings when I woke up overwhelmed by the challenges facing me, only to discover that 15 minutes of prayer completely shifted my perspective and filled my heart with supernatural peace. There have been crisis moments when my first prayer, offered before panic could take hold, opened my eyes to solutions I couldn't see before. And there have been countless times when the strength I received through prayer not only carried me through my own struggles, but enabled me to be a source of encouragement and hope to others who were facing their own battles. This is what God wants to do in your heart. This is the strength He wants to pour into your life. This is the peace He wants to establish in your mind and the hope He wants to anchor in your soul. The question isn't whether God is willing to strengthen your heart through prayer. He's already proven His willingness through the cross, through His word, through His constant invitation for you to come to Him. The question is whether you're willing to make prayer your first priority rather than your last resort. Are you ready to make that shift? Are you ready to discover what happens when you stop trying to carry everything on your own shoulders and start drawing from a strength that never fails? Because right now, in this very moment, God is extending an invitation to your weary heart. He's saying, "Come to me, and I will give you rest." But let me share something with you that might surprise you about this journey of praying first. It's not just about changing your morning routine or adding another spiritual discipline to your list. This is about fundamentally transforming how you approach every single aspect of your life. When you truly grasp the power of praying first, it rewrites the entire script of how you handle relationships, decisions, setbacks, and opportunities. Let me tell you about Jennifer, a working mother of 3 who felt like she was drowning in the demands of daily life. Every morning was chaos. Getting kids ready for school, preparing lunches, managing schedules, rushing to work already feeling behind before the day even started. She told me she felt like she was failing everyone, including herself, because there never seemed to be enough time, energy, or patience to go around. Sound familiar? Maybe you've been there too, feeling pulled in a dozen directions, trying to be everything to everyone while your own heart grows weaker and more fragmented with each passing day. Jennifer's breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when her youngest had a meltdown about his shoes. Her middle child couldn't find her homework. Her teenager was giving her attitude about breakfast, and she realized she had forgotten about an important meeting at work. Standing in her kitchen, surrounded by chaos, she broke down crying. Not the gentle tears of someone having a moment, but the deep, soul-wrenching sobs of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. That's when her neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, knocked on her door to return a borrowed book and found Jennifer in complete overwhelm. Mrs. Chen didn't offer quick fixes or empty platitudes. Instead, she sat with Jennifer and shared something that would change everything. She said, "Dear, you're trying to fill everyone's cup from an empty pitcher. Before you pour out for anyone else, you must first be filled yourself. And there's only one source that never runs dry." That conversation led Jennifer to experiment with praying first. Though she was skeptical it would make any real difference in her practical, everyday chaos. She started waking up just 10 minutes earlier, not to get ahead on her to-do list, but to sit quietly with God before the demands of the day crashed over her like a tidal wave. The first week was hard. Her mind would race to all the things she needed to accomplish. Her body felt restless sitting still when there was so much to do, but she persisted, and gradually something beautiful began to shift. Not in her circumstances at first, but in her heart. She noticed she was more patient with her children's morning struggles. When her youngest had another shoe meltdown, instead of snapping at him in frustration, she found herself kneeling down to his level, speaking gently, helping him work through his big emotions. When her teenager tested boundaries, instead of engaging in a power struggle that would ruin everyone's morning, she responded with calm firmness that actually de-escalated the situation. The most remarkable change happened in how she handled the unexpected disruptions that used to derail her entire day. When her middle child forgot her project at home and called from school in tears, Jennifer's first response wasn't panic or frustration. It was a quick, silent prayer for wisdom, followed by creative problem-solving that turned a crisis into a teachable moment about responsibility and grace. Within a month, her family began commenting on the change. Her husband said she seemed more peaceful, more present. Her children started coming to her with their problems instead of avoiding her when she was stressed. Her co-workers noticed she handled workplace pressure differently, remaining calm and solution-focused when others were reactive and overwhelmed. But here's what Jennifer told me was the most transformative part of learning to pray first. She stopped feeling like she was barely surviving each day and started feeling like she was actually living her life. The same responsibilities were still there. The same challenges still arose, but her heart had been strengthened to handle them from a place of divine peace rather than human striving. This is what I mean when I say that praying first transforms everything. It's not that your external circumstances magically become perfect. It's that your internal capacity to handle whatever life brings your way expands exponentially when you're drawing from God's limitless strength rather than your own limited resources. Now, let me address something that might be stirring in your heart right now. Maybe you're thinking, this sounds wonderful, but I've tried praying before and I didn't experience this kind of transformation. I still struggled. I still felt weak. Prayer felt more like a burden than a blessing. If that's you, I want you to know that your experience is valid, and there are reasons why prayer might have felt ineffective in the past. Often, when people say prayer doesn't work for them, they're approaching it with the wrong expectations or from the wrong posture. They're treating prayer like a cosmic vending machine, where you insert requests and expect immediate results. Or they're praying from a place of desperation, trying to convince God to care about their problems, rather than recognizing that He already cares more deeply than they could ever imagine. Here's what changes everything. Prayer isn't about getting God to do what you want. Prayer is about aligning your heart with what God wants to do in and through you. It's not about convincing Him to change your circumstances, though He certainly can and often does. It's about allowing Him to change you so that you can handle whatever circumstances you face with supernatural strength and peace. Think about the difference between a shallow-rooted tree and a deep-rooted tree when a storm comes. The shallow-rooted tree gets toppled by strong winds because it has no anchor, no foundation to draw stability from. But the deep-rooted tree bends with the wind. Its branches may sway dramatically, but it doesn't fall because its roots go deep into nourishing soil. When you pray first consistently, you're developing deep spiritual roots. You're anchoring your heart not in your circumstances, which change constantly, but in the unchanging character of God. You're drawing stability not from your ability to control outcomes, but from your connection to the One who is sovereign over all outcomes. This brings us to something crucial that many people misunderstand about spiritual strength. They think being spiritually strong means never feeling afraid, never struggling with doubt, never experiencing emotional pain. But that's not biblical strength at all. Look at David in the Psalms pouring out his fears, his anger, his confusion to God. Look at Jesus in the garden sweating drops of blood as he wrestled with what lay ahead. Spiritual strength isn't the absence of struggle. Spiritual strength is the presence of God in the midst of struggle. It's having access to peace that doesn't depend on your circumstances being peaceful. It's possessing hope that doesn't require your situation to look hopeful. It's experiencing joy that doesn't need everything in your life to be going well. When you pray first, you're not asking God to exempt you from the human experience of difficulty and pain. You're asking Him to fill you with His presence so that you can walk through whatever comes your way as more than a conqueror, knowing that nothing can separate you from His love. I think about Paul, writing from a Roman prison, telling the Philippians to rejoice always, to be anxious for nothing, to experience peace that passes understanding. Was his situation ideal? Absolutely not. He was facing potential execution, separated from the churches he loved, uncertain about his future, but his heart was anchored in something deeper than his circumstances. His strength came from a source that no prison could contain, no threat could diminish, no uncertainty could shake. That same source of strength is available to you right now. That same peace that sustained Paul in prison can guard your heart in whatever prison of fear, anxiety, or discouragement you might be facing today. Let me share with you what happens in the unseen realm when you pray first. The Bible tells us that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of darkness. There's a spiritual battle being fought over your heart, your peace, your purpose, your family, your future. When you pray first, you're not just having a nice spiritual moment. You're engaging in warfare on behalf of everything that matters to you. You're declaring that your day belongs to God, not to chaos. You're announcing that your heart is under divine protection, not subject to every emotional wind that blows. You're proclaiming that your strength comes from heaven, not from your own willpower or determination. This spiritual reality is why praying first is so transformational. You're literally inviting the power of heaven to invade your earthly circumstances. You're positioning yourself as an ally of God rather than trying to be the hero of your own story. You're acknowledging that there are forces at work beyond what you can see, and you're choosing to align yourself with the force that has already won the ultimate victory. But here's something beautiful about this spiritual truth. You don't have to understand all the theological implications to experience the benefits. You don't need a seminary degree or perfect doctrine to access God's strength through prayer. You just need a humble heart that recognizes your need for Him, and a simple faith that believes He cares about every detail of your life. I met a construction worker named Carlos who had never considered himself particularly spiritual or religious. He worked hard, loved his family, tried to be a good man, but prayer felt foreign and complicated to him. His world was concrete and steel, practical problems with practical solutions. But when his teenage daughter started struggling with depression and anxiety, he found himself completely out of his depth. All his practical skills, his can-do attitude, his ability to fix things with his hands, none of it helped when his daughter couldn't get out of bed, couldn't stop crying, couldn't see any hope for her future. He felt helpless watching his little girl suffer, and nothing he tried seemed to make a difference. That's when his wife suggested they start each day by praying together for their daughter. Carlos was reluctant at first. He didn't know how to pray, didn't have fancy words, wasn't even sure God would listen to someone like him. But desperation drove him to his knees, and he began each morning with simple, honest words. God, I don't know what I'm doing, but my daughter is hurting and I need your help. Please strengthen her heart and show us what to do. Something remarkable began to happen, not overnight, but gradually. As Carlos and his wife prayed first each morning, they found themselves responding to their daughter's struggles with more patience and wisdom. Instead of trying to fix everything immediately, they learned to simply be present with her pain. Instead of lecturing her about thinking positively, they began listening to her heart. Their morning prayers also led them to resources they hadn't known existed. A counselor who specialized in teenage depression, a support group for parents, small changes in routine and environment that helped their daughter feel more stable and supported. Most importantly, their daughter began to see that she wasn't alone in her struggle, that her parents were fighting for her through prayer, even when she couldn't fight for herself. It took time, professional help, and a lot of patient love, but their daughter slowly began to heal. Years later, she told her parents that knowing they were praying for her every morning gave her hope even in her darkest moments. She said it made her feel like she was worth fighting for, like her life had value even when she couldn't see it herself. Carlos became a powerful advocate for prayer among his co-workers, not through preaching or trying to convert anyone, but simply through the transformation they witnessed in how he handled stress, challenges, and family struggles. He would tell anyone who asked that prayer wasn't about having all the right words or understanding all the mysteries of faith. It was about connecting with the one who has all the strength you need when your own strength runs out. This is the beauty of praying first. It meets you exactly where you are, whether you're a theology scholar or someone who's never opened a Bible, whether you're facing a crisis or just trying to navigate the everyday challenges of life, whether you're naturally drawn to spiritual things or completely new to the idea of prayer. God doesn't require you to clean up your act before you come to Him. He doesn't demand that you figure out all your theological questions before you pray. He doesn't insist that you use perfect language or follow specific formulas. He simply invites you to come as you are, bring what you have, and trust Him to do what only He can do. When you pray first, you're not trying to impress God with your spirituality. You're not attempting to earn His favor through religious performance. You're simply accepting His invitation to relationship, acknowledging your need for His strength, and positioning your heart to receive what He's already eager to give. And here's what I want you to understand about the process of developing this practice. It's not about perfection, it's about progression. You might start with 2 minutes and gradually extend to 5 or 10. You might begin with simple, honest conversations with God and eventually incorporate scripture reading or worship music. You might start praying only in crisis moments and slowly develop the habit of seeking God first thing each morning. The key is to start somewhere and stay consistent. God honors even your smallest steps toward Him. He celebrates your desire to seek Him even when your prayers feel awkward or inadequate. He sees your heart more than He evaluates your words. I remember a woman named Lisa who felt intimidated by the idea of prayer because she had grown up in a tradition where prayers were formal, elaborate, and full of religious language she didn't understand. She thought she had to pray correctly, or God wouldn't hear her. This misconception kept her from praying at all for years, even though her heart longed for connection with God. When someone finally told her that prayer was simply talking to God, like she would talk to a loving father, everything changed. She began with the most basic conversations. God, I'm scared about this situation. God, I need help with my kids today. God, I'm grateful for this beautiful sunrise. God, I don't know what to do here. Those simple, honest prayers became the foundation for a relationship with God that transformed her life. She discovered that God wasn't looking for perfect prose or theological sophistication. He was looking for a sincere heart that recognized its need for him. As her prayer life developed, she began to notice patterns in how God responded to her. Sometimes through sudden peace in the midst of chaos, sometimes through wisdom that seemed to come from nowhere, sometimes through other people who showed up at just the right moment with exactly what she needed to hear. The more she prayed first, the more sensitive she became to God's presence throughout her day. She started recognizing his hand in circumstances she used to attribute to coincidence. She began seeing opportunities she had previously missed because her heart was too anxious or distracted to notice them. Most significantly, she found that her capacity to handle life's challenges expanded dramatically. Problems that used to send her into tailspins became manageable. Relationships that used to drain her energy became sources of joy. Decisions that used to paralyze her with indecision became clear as she learned to seek God's guidance first. This progression from simple, hesitant prayers to confident, consistent communion with God is available to anyone willing to take that first step. You don't need to wait until you feel ready or qualified. You don't need to postpone prayer until you've studied more or gotten your life together. You can start right now, right where you are, with whatever faith you have. The invitation to pray first isn't just about improving your morning routine or adding a spiritual discipline to your life. It's an invitation into relationship with the Creator of the universe, who knows you intimately, loves you unconditionally, and wants to strengthen your heart for every challenge and opportunity that lies ahead. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, you have a choice. You can reach for your phone and immediately fill your mind with the chaos and anxiety of the world. You can jump into your day reactive, stressed, trying to handle everything in your own strength. Or you can choose to pray first, to connect with the source of all strength, to anchor your heart in truth before the storms of life have a chance to shake your peace. That choice, repeated day after day, will determine not just how you feel about your life, but how equipped you are to live it with purpose, peace, and power. It will influence not just your own heart, but the hearts of everyone your life touches. It will shape not just your immediate circumstances, but your eternal legacy. The question isn't whether you have time to pray first. The question is whether you can afford not to. The question isn't whether you're qualified to approach God in prayer. The question is whether you're willing to accept His invitation to relationship. The question isn't whether prayer will solve all your problems. The question is whether you're ready to receive the strength to handle whatever problems come your way with grace, wisdom, and supernatural peace. Your heart is precious to God. Your struggles matter to Him. Your future is important to Him. He's not waiting for you to get stronger before He helps you. He's waiting for you to recognize that His strength is made perfect in your weakness, that His power is most evident when you acknowledge your need for Him. Right now, in this moment, He's extending an invitation to your weary heart. He's offering to be your strength when you feel weak, your peace when you feel anxious, your hope when you feel discouraged. He's promising to guard your heart and mind, to guide your steps, to provide for your needs, to fight your battles, to strengthen you for whatever lies ahead. All He asks is that you come to Him first, before you try to handle everything on your own, before you let worry consume your thoughts, before you allow fear to dictate your responses, before you exhaust yourself trying to be strong enough, smart enough, capable enough to manage life in your own power. When you make that choice to pray first, you're not just changing your morning routine, you're rewiring your entire approach to life. You're trading the exhausting cycle of self-reliance for the restful rhythm of divine dependence. You're exchanging the heavy burden of trying to control outcomes for the light yoke of trusting God's sovereignty. But let me tell you what happens in the weeks and months after you commit to this practice. The transformation doesn't happen all at once, like a dramatic movie scene where everything suddenly becomes perfect. Instead, it's like watching a garden grow. Day by day, almost imperceptibly, new life begins to spring up in places that were once barren. I think about Marcus, a small business owner who was on the verge of bankruptcy when he first heard about the power of praying first. His company was hemorrhaging money. His employees were losing confidence. His marriage was strained from the financial pressure, and he was barely sleeping at night, consumed with worry about losing everything he had worked so hard to build. Marcus wasn't what you'd call a religious man. He believed in God in a general sort of way, but prayer felt like something other people did, something for folks who were more spiritual or had more time. But when you're drowning, you'll grab onto any lifeline that's offered, and someone he respected suggested that he start each day by surrendering his business concerns to God before diving into the chaos of trying to save his company. The first morning Marcus tried to pray first, he felt awkward and unsure. He sat in his car in the parking lot of his office building, not knowing exactly what to say or how to begin. Finally, he just started talking to God like he would talk to a trusted advisor. God, I'm in over my head here. I don't know if you care about small businesses or financial problems, but I'm running out of options. If you're listening, I could really use some help. That simple prayer didn't immediately solve his financial crisis, but something subtle shifted in Marcus's heart. Instead of walking into his office consumed with panic about what he might lose, he found himself asking different questions. Instead of, how am I going to survive this? He started wondering, what can I learn from this situation? Instead of, why is this happening to me? He began considering, how can I handle this challenge with integrity and wisdom? As Marcus continued praying first each morning, his decision-making process began to change. Rather than making desperate moves driven by fear, he found himself stepping back, seeking wisdom, considering long-term consequences instead of just immediate relief. He started having honest conversations with his employees about the company's struggles, and to his surprise, several of them came forward with cost-saving ideas and efficiency improvements he had never considered. The breakthrough didn't come in the form of a miraculous financial windfall, though Marcus had certainly hoped for that. Instead, it came through a series of small, wise decisions made from a place of peace rather than panic. A competitor approached him about a merger that 6 months earlier he would have rejected out of pride, but now he recognized as a strategic opportunity that could save both companies. The merger wasn't easy, and it required Marcus to let go of being the sole owner of his business. But because he had been praying first, seeking God's guidance rather than just his own agenda, he was able to navigate the transition with grace and wisdom. Not only did his business survive, but within 2 years the merged company was more profitable than either original business had ever been. What struck me most about Marcus's story wasn't the business success, though that was certainly wonderful. It was how the practice of praying first had transformed him as a person. His wife told me that the man who came home each evening was different from the one who used to arrive stressed, distracted, and emotionally unavailable. His employees commented that he had become a leader they actually wanted to follow, someone who remained calm under pressure and made decisions based on wisdom rather than fear. Marcus himself said that learning to pray first had taught him the difference between being busy and being productive, between reacting to circumstances and responding to them, between trying to control everything and trusting that God was working even in situations he couldn't see or understand. This kind of transformation is available to you, regardless of what challenges you're facing. Whether your struggles are financial like Marcus's, relational like Jennifer's, health-related, career-focused, or something entirely different, the principle remains the same. When you connect with the source of all strength before you engage with the source of your stress, everything changes. Let me share something profound about the nature of divine strength that most people don't fully grasp. We tend to think of strength in human terms as something we either have or don't have, something that gets depleted when we use it and needs to be replenished through rest or nutrition. But God's strength operates on completely different principles. Divine strength actually increases the more you use it. It multiplies when it's shared with others. It deepens when it's tested by difficult circumstances. It becomes more evident when your own human strength reaches its limits. This is why the Apostle Paul could say that he was content in weakness, because it was in those moments of acknowledged limitation that Christ's power rested upon him most powerfully. When you pray first and tap into this divine strength, you're not just borrowing power temporarily, like using someone else's phone charger when your battery dies. You're actually being transformed at a cellular level, if you will, becoming a person who carries God's strength as part of your identity, rather than just accessing it in moments of crisis. I remember meeting an elderly woman named Rose, who had been practicing prayer as her first priority for over 40 years. At 83, she had buried a husband, raised 5 children mostly as a single mother, survived cancer twice, and weathered financial hardships that would have broken many people. Yet when I spoke with her, what struck me wasn't her resilience or her toughness, though she certainly possessed both. What struck me was her joy. Rose had a quality of peace and contentment that seemed to radiate from deep within her soul. She spoke about her hardships, not with bitterness or self-pity, but with a kind of wonder at how God had carried her through each valley and used every struggle to deepen her faith and expand her capacity to help others who were facing similar challenges. When I asked her about the secret to maintaining such peace through so many storms, she smiled and said something I'll never forget. "Honey, when you start every day by plugging into the power source, you never have to worry about running out of juice. The storms may come and they may be fierce, but the power that holds you steady comes from a source that no storm can touch." Rose had discovered what it means to live from a place of divine strength, rather than constantly trying to generate enough human strength to handle life's demands. She had learned that when you pray first consistently over time, God's character begins to be formed in you. His peace becomes your default setting. His wisdom becomes your natural response. His love becomes the lens through which you see other people and circumstances. This formation process doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without challenges. There will be days when you wake up and prayer feels dry, when God seems distant, when your problems feel bigger than your faith. These are the days when praying first becomes not just beneficial but essential, because it's in these moments that you're training your heart to seek God, not based on how you feel, but based on who He is. Think about a musician learning to play an instrument. In the beginning, every note requires conscious effort and concentration. The fingers don't naturally find the right positions, the timing feels awkward, and the music that emerges might not sound particularly beautiful. But with consistent practice, something remarkable happens. The muscle memory develops, the movements become fluid, and eventually, beautiful music flows almost effortlessly. Praying first works in a similar way. Initially, it might feel forced or awkward. You might struggle to know what to say or how long to pray. You might not sense any immediate difference in your heart or circumstances, but as you persist in this practice, something beautiful begins to develop in your spiritual life. Your heart begins to naturally turn toward God throughout the day, not just during your designated prayer time. You start recognizing His voice more clearly, distinguishing between His leading and your own thoughts or desires. You develop what the Bible calls the mind of Christ, a way of thinking and perceiving that aligns with God's perspective rather than being limited to purely human understanding. I met a young mother named Sarah who had been struggling with postpartum depression after the birth of her second child. The days felt endless and overwhelming, filled with crying babies, sleepless nights, and a crushing sense that she was failing at the most important job she'd ever had. Her husband was supportive, but working long hours to provide for their growing family, and Sarah often felt isolated and inadequate. A friend suggested she try starting each day with prayer, even if it was just 5 minutes while her coffee brewed and before the children woke up. Sarah was skeptical that such a small change could make any difference in her overwhelming circumstances, but she was desperate enough to try anything. The first week was difficult. Sarah's mind would race with all the tasks ahead of her, all the ways she felt she was falling short as a mother and wife. But gradually, as she persisted in offering those early morning moments to God, something began to shift. Not in her external circumstances, which remained challenging, but in her internal capacity to handle those circumstances. She found herself responding to her toddler's tantrums with more patience. When the baby cried inconsolably, instead of feeling like a failure, she began to see these moments as opportunities to practice the kind of steadfast love that God showed her. When her husband came home stressed from work, instead of adding her own frustrations to his burden, she found herself able to be a source of peace and encouragement. The depression didn't disappear overnight, and Sarah still had difficult days, but the quality of her difficult days changed. Instead of being consumed by despair and self-condemnation, she found herself able to acknowledge her struggles, while still maintaining hope that this season would pass, and that God was using even her hardest moments to develop something beautiful in her character. Years later, Sarah became a mentor to other young mothers going through similar struggles. She would tell them that learning to pray first had taught her the difference between having a hard day and being defined by hard circumstances. She learned that her identity wasn't determined by how well she managed her children's behavior, or how clean her house was, or how gourmet her meals turned out to be. Her identity was rooted in being God's beloved daughter, and that truth remained constant, regardless of how chaotic her daily life might feel. This is what happens when you allow prayer to become not just something you do, but a fundamental part of who you are. It changes your relationship not only with God, but with yourself, with other people, and with the circumstances of your life. You begin to see challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats to your peace. You start viewing difficult people as souls in need of love rather than obstacles to your happiness. You develop the ability to find meaning and purpose, even in mundane or difficult seasons. But here's something crucial I want you to understand about this transformation process. It doesn't make you superhuman or exempt from normal human emotions and struggles. Praying first doesn't turn you into someone who never feels sad, never gets angry, never experiences fear or disappointment. What it does is give you a foundation of strength and peace that remains steady even when your emotions are turbulent. Think of it like the difference between a house built on sand and a house built on rock. When storms come, both houses experience the full force of wind and rain. The difference isn't in the intensity of the storm they face, but in the foundation that supports them through the storm. The house on sand gets swept away because it has no solid base to anchor it. The house on rock stands firm because its foundation is unshakable. When you pray first consistently, you're building your life on the rock-solid foundation of God's character and promises. You'll still face storms, but you won't be swept away by them because your foundation can withstand whatever winds blow against your life. I think about a man named David who lost his job unexpectedly after 15 years with the same company. He was in his mid-40s, had 2 teenagers approaching college age, and a mortgage that required steady income to maintain. The job market in his field was competitive, especially for someone his age, and after months of searching, he was beginning to panic about his family's financial future. David had been praying first for several years, so his first response to losing his job wasn't despair, though he certainly felt disappointed and concerned. Instead, he found himself able to approach this crisis as an opportunity to trust God in a new way, to see what doors might open that wouldn't have been available if he had remained in his comfortable but ultimately unfulfilling position. As David continued seeking God first each morning, asking for guidance and provision, he began to notice opportunities he might have overlooked before. A former colleague mentioned a consulting opportunity that could provide temporary income while he searched for permanent employment. A neighbor asked if he might be interested in helping with a home renovation project, which led to discovering a talent for design and construction he had forgotten he possessed. Most significantly, the extended time between jobs gave David space to reevaluate his priorities and consider whether this might be the right time to pursue a long-held dream of starting his own business. Before losing his job, he had felt trapped in a career that provided financial security, but little personal fulfillment. Now, with his back against the wall financially, he found himself willing to take risks he never would have considered before. The business David eventually started grew slowly but steadily, and within 3 years, he was earning more than he had at his previous job while doing work that felt meaningful and aligned with his values. But what impressed me most about David's story wasn't the successful business outcome. It was how he had navigated the uncertainty and fear of unemployment with such grace and faith. He told me that the months of job searching had actually strengthened his relationship with God in ways that the comfortable years of steady employment never had. Being forced to depend on God's provision rather than his own paycheck had taught him lessons about trust and faith that he couldn't have learned any other way. This is one of the beautiful paradoxes of praying first and allowing God to strengthen your heart. Sometimes the very circumstances that seem most threatening to your security become the catalysts for the deepest growth and the most profound breakthroughs. When you're anchored in divine strength rather than human security, you can face uncertainty with confidence because you know that your ultimate security doesn't depend on your circumstances remaining stable. Let me share with you something that might challenge your thinking about prayer and strength. Many people approach prayer with a consumer mentality, coming to God primarily when they need something and expecting Him to function like a divine vending machine that dispenses blessings when you insert the right prayers. But this transactional approach to prayer misses the entire point of what God is offering through relationship with Him. When you pray first, you're not primarily trying to get things from God. You're positioning yourself to receive God Himself. You're not just seeking His help with your problems, though He certainly cares about your practical needs. You're seeking His presence, His character, His perspective, His heart for your situation. This shift from a consumer mindset to a relational mindset changes everything about how you pray and what you expect from prayer. Instead of measuring the effectiveness of prayer by whether you get the specific outcomes you requested, you begin to measure it by whether you're becoming more like Christ, whether your character is being formed in His image, whether your heart is growing in love, peace, patience, and wisdom. I remember a woman named Maria who had been praying desperately for her adult son to overcome his addiction to drugs and alcohol. For years, she had pleaded with God to intervene, to change her son's heart, to deliver him from the substances that were destroying his life and devastating their family. She had tried everything she could think of, from intervention programs to tough love, to enabling his destructive choices out of fear that he might overdose if she cut off support entirely. When Maria learned about praying first, she initially saw it as just another strategy to get God to answer her prayers about her son. But as she began spending time with God each morning before focusing on her son's problems, something unexpected began to happen. Her prayers gradually shifted from demanding that God fix her son to asking God to show her how to love her son well, regardless of his choices. This didn't mean Maria became passive about her son's addiction or stopped hoping for his recovery, but she began to find peace in the midst of a situation she couldn't control, strength to maintain healthy boundaries even when it felt cruel, and wisdom to know when to offer help and when to allow her son to face the natural consequences of his decisions. The transformation in Maria's heart had a profound impact on her relationship with her son. Instead of every interaction being dominated by her anxiety about his addiction, she was able to simply be present with him as a person, to express love without trying to manipulate him into getting clean, to offer support without enabling destructive behavior. Her son's addiction journey was long and difficult, with multiple relapses and setbacks. But when he eventually entered recovery and began rebuilding his life, he told Maria that what had made the difference wasn't her lectures or her attempts to control his behavior. It was seeing the peace and strength she had developed through prayer, witnessing how she had learned to love him unconditionally while still maintaining healthy boundaries. Maria's story illustrates a profound truth about praying first and receiving strength from God. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't the change in your circumstances, but the change in your heart that enables you to navigate unchanged circumstances with grace, wisdom, and peace. This doesn't mean you should stop praying for specific outcomes or that God doesn't care about your practical needs and desires, but it means recognizing that God's primary goal isn't just to make your life comfortable or to solve all your problems. His primary goal is to form Christ's character in you, to develop in you the kind of love, faith, hope, and strength that can flourish regardless of what's happening around you. When you understand this, prayer becomes less about trying to convince God to change your situation and more about allowing God to change you. It becomes less about getting what you want and more about wanting what God wants for you. It becomes less about having your prayers answered and more about having your heart aligned with God's heart. This alignment is what produces the supernatural strength that we've been talking about. When your will is surrendered to God's will, when your desires are shaped by His desires, when your perspective is informed by His perspective, you tap into a source of power and peace that doesn't fluctuate based on your circumstances. You begin to experience what Jesus meant when He said that His yoke is easy and His burden is light. Not because following God eliminates all difficulty from your life, but because when you're pulling in the same direction as God, when you're aligned with His purposes and powered by His strength, even heavy loads become manageable. This is the strength that enabled the early Christians to sing hymns in prison, to forgive their persecutors, to face death with courage and hope. This is the strength that has sustained believers through persecution, poverty, illness, loss, and every form of human suffering throughout history. This is the strength that is available to you right now in whatever situation you're facing, through the simple but powerful practice of praying first. As we near the end of our time together, I want to leave you with a vision of what your life could look like 6 months, 1 year, 5 years from now, if you commit to making prayer your first priority. I want you to imagine waking up each morning not with dread about the challenges ahead, but with anticipation about how God might work in and through your life that day. Picture yourself facing unexpected crises with calm confidence instead of panic, knowing that your security doesn't depend on your ability to control outcomes, but on your connection to the one who controls all things. Envision yourself in relationships characterized by patience, kindness, and forgiveness, rather than reactivity, defensiveness, and resentment. Imagine making decisions from a place of wisdom and peace, rather than fear and pressure, knowing that you have access to divine guidance that sees beyond your limited perspective. Think about going to sleep each night, not consumed with worry about tomorrow, but resting in the assurance that the same God who carried you through today will be with you tomorrow as well. This isn't fantasy or wishful thinking. This is the reality that becomes available when you learn to draw your strength from the source that never runs dry, never fails, never abandons you in your time of need. This is what happens when you stop trying to be strong enough on your own and start accessing the limitless strength that flows from the heart of God. The invitation is extended. The door is open. The strength you need is available. The only question remaining is whether you'll make the choice to pray first, to seek God's face before you face your day, to position your heart to receive the supernatural strength that He is eager to pour into your life. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, you have an opportunity to begin writing a new chapter in your story, a chapter characterized not by striving and stress, but by rest and trust. Not by anxiety and overwhelm, but by peace and confidence. Not by weakness and defeat, but by strength and victory. The choice is yours. The power is His. The strength you need is waiting for you in the secret place of prayer, where your heart meets His heart, where your weakness encounters His strength, where your questions find His peace. Will you choose to pray first? Will you position yourself to receive the strength that God wants to pour into your heart? Will you discover what it means to live not in your own limited power, but in the unlimited strength of the one who created you, loves you, and has plans for you that are better than anything you could ask or imagine? Your strengthened heart is just one prayer away. Your transformed life is just one choice away. Your new beginning is waiting for you in the presence of the God who never fails, never leaves, never stops loving you, and never runs out of strength to pour into your weary soul. The time is now. The invitation is clear. The strength you need is available. Will you pray first today and discover the power that changes everything? The answer to that question will determine not just how you feel tomorrow, but how you live for the rest of your life. Because here's what I've discovered after walking alongside thousands of believers who've made this journey from weakness to strength, from anxiety to peace, from defeat to victory. The moment you truly commit to praying first, everything in your spiritual life begins to accelerate. It's like you've been trying to drive uphill with the parking brake on, wondering why progress feels so difficult, why every day feels like such a struggle. When you learn to pray first, it's like releasing that brake and discovering the power that was always available to you, but somehow remained untapped. Let me tell you about a conversation I had with a man named Robert, who completely changed my understanding of what it means to live from divine strength rather than human willpower. Robert had been a successful attorney for over 20 years, known for his sharp mind, his ability to work under pressure, and his reputation for winning difficult cases. From the outside, he appeared to have everything together. But Robert came to me during one of the darkest seasons of his life. His marriage was falling apart after years of him prioritizing work over family. His teenage children barely spoke to him, viewing him as a stranger who happened to live in their house. His health was deteriorating from stress and neglect. Despite all his professional success, he felt like a complete failure in the areas that mattered most. What struck me about Robert wasn't his problems, which were certainly serious, but his honesty about how he had been living. He said, "I've been running on empty for so long, I forgot what it felt like to actually have fuel in the tank. I've been trying to be strong for everyone, solve every problem, carry every burden, and I'm completely burned out. I don't even know who I am anymore when I'm not performing, when I'm not achieving, when I'm not proving my worth through what I accomplish." Robert's story resonated with me because I think many of us can relate to that feeling of running on empty, of trying to generate enough strength from our own resources to handle everything life throws at us. We live in a culture that celebrates self-reliance, that tells us we should be able to handle anything if we just work harder, think smarter, or develop more willpower. But here's what Robert discovered when he began praying first, and what you can discover too. Human strength, no matter how impressive, has limits. Divine strength is limitless. Human resources eventually get depleted. Divine resources are constantly renewed. Human wisdom can only see so far ahead. Divine wisdom sees the end from the beginning. When Robert started waking up 30 minutes earlier each morning to pray before diving into his demanding schedule, he initially felt like he was wasting time he didn't have. His to-do list was already overwhelming. His calendar was packed with meetings and deadlines, and spending time in prayer felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. But within 2 weeks, something remarkable began to shift. Robert found himself making better decisions more quickly. Instead of agonizing over every choice, he discovered that conflicts which used to consume hours of his mental energy were resolving more smoothly because he was approaching them with wisdom and peace, rather than stress and reactivity. Most importantly, Robert began to see his family not as another set of demands competing for his limited time and energy, but as precious gifts that God had entrusted to his care. Instead of coming home exhausted and irritable, he found himself genuinely interested in his children's lives, patient with his wife's concerns, present for the moments that actually mattered. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Robert had to learn to quiet his mind, which was accustomed to constantly racing from one problem to the next. He had to resist the urge to check his phone or start planning his day during his prayer time. He had to push through mornings when prayer felt dry or pointless, and trust that something was happening even when he couldn't feel it. But as Robert persisted in this practice, he began to experience what he described as supernatural efficiency. Tasks that used to drain him began to feel manageable. Problems that used to keep him awake at night began to resolve themselves or reveal solutions he hadn't seen before. Relationships that had been sources of stress began to become sources of joy and strength. The most profound change, Robert told me, wasn't in his external circumstances, though those certainly improved. The most profound change was in his identity. He stopped defining himself by what he accomplished and started understanding himself as God's beloved son, someone who was valued not for his performance but for his identity as a child of the Most High. This shift in identity is one of the most powerful aspects of learning to pray first and draw strength from God. When you consistently connect with the one who created you, who knows you intimately, who loves you unconditionally, you begin to see yourself through his eyes, rather than through the distorted lens of cultural expectations, personal failures, or other people's opinions. You start to understand that your worth isn't determined by your productivity, your value isn't measured by your achievements, and your security doesn't depend on your ability to control outcomes. This understanding becomes a wellspring of strength that sustains you through every season of life. I want to share something with you that might surprise you about the nature of divine strength. Many people think that drawing strength from God means you'll never feel tired, never struggle with difficult emotions, never face situations that stretch you beyond your comfort zone. But that's not how divine strength works. Divine strength doesn't eliminate the human experience of challenge and growth. What it does is provide you with the resources to engage with those challenges from a place of peace rather than panic, from wisdom rather than worry, from love rather than fear. Think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was facing the most difficult moment of his earthly life, and he was honest about his emotions. He told his disciples that his soul was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He sweat drops of blood as he wrestled with what lay ahead. He asked the Father if there might be another way, but notice what happened next. After pouring out his heart in prayer, after aligning his will with the Father's will, Jesus rose from that place of prayer with supernatural strength to face betrayal, arrest, torture, and crucifixion with dignity, grace, and love. The prayer didn't eliminate his suffering, but it equipped him to suffer redemptively, to transform even his greatest trial into the means of salvation for the world. This is the kind of strength that becomes available when you learn to pray first. Not strength that exempts you from difficulty, but strength that enables you to face difficulty with grace. Not strength that eliminates all pain, but strength that finds meaning and purpose even in painful circumstances. Let me tell you about Anna, a nurse who worked in the pediatric cancer ward of a major hospital. Every day she witnessed suffering that would break most people's hearts. She watched children fight battles no child should have to fight. She comforted parents facing every parent's worst nightmare. She held babies who might not live to see their first birthday. For years, Anna struggled with what she called compassion fatigue. She loved her work and felt called to care for these precious children and their families, but the emotional weight was crushing her spirit. She found herself crying in supply closets, lying awake at night thinking about her patients, questioning God about why innocent children had to suffer. When Anna began praying first each morning, asking God to fill her heart with His strength and compassion before she encountered the pain and fear that filled her workplace, everything began to change. Not the circumstances of her job, which remained heartbreaking, but her capacity to be present in those circumstances as a vessel of God's love and peace. Anna discovered that when she started her day connected to the source of all comfort, she became a conduit of that comfort to others. Parents began seeking her out, not just for her medical expertise, but for the peace and hope they sensed in her presence. Children responded to her with unusual trust and calm. Other healthcare workers started coming to her when they were struggling, drawn by something they couldn't quite name but desperately needed. The most remarkable thing Anna told me was that the more she gave of herself from this place of divine strength, the more she seemed to have. Instead of being depleted by her work, she found herself energized by the privilege of being God's hands and feet in one of the most difficult places on earth. Years later, Anna became the head chaplain for the Children's Hospital, officially doing what she had been doing informally for years, bringing the comfort and strength of God into places of desperate need. She told me that learning to pray first had taught her the difference between caring from her own limited emotional resources and caring from God's unlimited well of compassion. This multiplication effect is one of the most beautiful aspects of divine strength. When you're drawing from God's resources rather than your own, giving doesn't deplete you, it actually increases your capacity to give. Serving others doesn't drain your energy. It connects you more deeply to your purpose. Facing challenges doesn't weaken your faith. It strengthens your trust in the one who is with you in every battle. But let me address something that might be stirring in your heart as you hear these stories. Maybe you're thinking, these people seem to have dramatic testimonies and clear results from prayer. What if I try praying first and nothing obvious changes? What if I don't feel any different? What if my circumstances remain difficult? I want you to know that the absence of dramatic external change doesn't mean prayer isn't working. Sometimes the most profound transformations happen so gradually, so naturally, that you don't even notice them until you look back and realize how different you've become. I think about my friend Karen, who began praying first during a season when everything in her life seemed stable and relatively easy. She didn't start this practice because of a crisis or desperate need, but simply because she sensed God inviting her into deeper relationship with Him. For months, Karen wondered if prayer was really making any difference. Her circumstances didn't change dramatically. She didn't have mystical experiences or hear audible voices from God. Her daily routine remained largely the same, and she questioned whether she was doing something wrong or if prayer was really as transformative as she had heard. But then Karen's father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and she found herself thrust into the role of primary caregiver, while also managing her own family and career responsibilities. It was during this season of unexpected challenge that Karen realized how profoundly those months of praying first had prepared her heart. Instead of falling apart under the weight of watching her father's decline, Karen found herself equipped with supernatural patience, creativity in finding solutions to complex problems, and peace that sustained her through the most heartbreaking moments of seeing the man who had been her hero slowly slip away. Her siblings marveled at her strength, asking how she managed to remain so calm and positive when everything felt so overwhelming. Karen realized that the daily practice of praying first, even when it seemed unnecessary or ineffective, had been building spiritual muscle that she didn't know she possessed until she needed it. This is often how divine strength works. It's not always dramatic or immediately obvious. Sometimes it's like a slow, steady fortification of your soul that you don't recognize until you're tested by circumstances that would have previously overwhelmed you. The strength that God provides through prayer isn't always flashy or supernatural in obvious ways. Sometimes it's simply the ability to remain kind when others are cruel, to maintain hope when circumstances look hopeless, to choose forgiveness when revenge would feel more satisfying, to trust God's goodness when life feels unfair. These quiet demonstrations of divine strength may not make headlines, but they transform families, heal communities, and demonstrate the reality of God's power to a watching world. They prove that there's a different way to live, a different source of strength available to those who learn to access it. Now, let me share with you some practical wisdom about establishing and maintaining the practice of praying first. Because while the concept is simple, implementing it consistently can be challenging, especially in our culture of constant distraction and busy schedules. The most common mistake people make when they decide to start praying first is trying to do too much too soon. They commit to praying for an hour every morning, or they try to follow elaborate prayer formulas they've read about, or they put pressure on themselves to have profound spiritual experiences every time they pray. This approach almost always leads to frustration and eventual abandonment of the practice. Instead, start small and build gradually. Begin with just 5 or 10 minutes of simple conversation with God. Focus on consistency rather than length or complexity. I remember a busy executive named Thomas who desperately wanted to develop a prayer life, but felt overwhelmed by the idea of adding another commitment to his already packed schedule. He was traveling constantly, working long hours, and barely had time for the relationships and responsibilities he already had. We talked about starting with what I call micro prayers throughout his day. Instead of trying to carve out a separate block of time for prayer, Thomas began turning routine moments into opportunities for connection with God. While his coffee brewed each morning, he would thank God for the day ahead and ask for wisdom and strength. During his commute, he would pray for his family, his co-workers, and the decisions he needed to make. Before important meetings, he would take 30 seconds to silently ask for God's guidance. These brief moments of prayer gradually created a rhythm of dependence on God throughout Thomas's day. As this rhythm became natural, he found himself wanting more time for focused prayer, and he began waking up 15 minutes earlier to spend quiet time with God before his day became chaotic. Within a year, Thomas had developed a rich prayer life that included both brief prayers throughout the day and longer times of focused communion with God. But it all started with tiny, manageable steps that honored his current reality while creating space for growth. This principle of starting small applies not only to the length of your prayers, but also to your expectations about what prayer will accomplish. Don't put pressure on yourself to have mystical experiences or immediate answers to all your problems. Simply focus on showing up consistently and being honest with God about your heart, your needs, your fears, and your hopes. Prayer is fundamentally about relationship, and relationships develop slowly through consistent, honest communication. You don't become best friends with someone overnight, and you don't develop intimate communion with God in a few weeks. But every conversation matters. Every moment of connection contributes to the growing bond between your heart and His. Another crucial aspect of developing a sustainable prayer practice is creating an environment that supports focus and minimizes distraction. This doesn't mean you need a perfect prayer room or elaborate setup, but it does mean being intentional about removing obstacles that might interfere with your ability to connect with God. For most people in our smartphone-dominated culture, this means putting the phone in another room during prayer time, or at least turning it completely off. The temptation to check messages, social media, or news can be overwhelming, especially when prayer feels challenging or boring. But every time you choose to stay present with God, instead of reaching for your phone, you're strengthening your spiritual focus and deepening your capacity for communion with Him. Some people find that having a specific location for prayer helps create a sense of sacred space and routine. This might be a particular chair, a corner of your bedroom, or even a spot in your car before you start your commute. The location matters less than the consistency of showing up in that place with the intention of meeting with God. Others find that incorporating simple elements like worship music, scripture reading, or journaling enhances their prayer time and helps them stay focused. Experiment with different approaches and discover what helps you connect most naturally with God's presence. But remember that the goal isn't to create the perfect prayer experience. The goal is to consistently position your heart to receive from God, regardless of how you feel or what's happening in your circumstances. There will be mornings when prayer feels rich and meaningful, when you sense God's presence clearly and receive specific guidance or comfort. There will also be mornings when prayer feels dry and difficult, when your mind wanders constantly and you wonder if you're accomplishing anything at all. Both types of experiences are normal and valuable parts of developing a mature prayer life. The mornings when prayer feels easy and rewarding teach you to recognize and receive from God's presence. The mornings when prayer feels challenging and unrewarding teach you to seek God not because of what you get from Him, but because of who He is and who you are in relationship to Him. This perseverance through both seasons of prayer creates the kind of deep, unshakable trust that sustains you through every circumstance of life. It's the difference between fair-weather faith that depends on feeling good and all-weather faith that remains steady, regardless of internal or external conditions. Let me share something profound that happens as you mature in your practice of praying first. You begin to recognize that prayer isn't just something you do for a few minutes each morning, but a way of living throughout the day. Prayer becomes less about specific times and techniques, and more about an ongoing awareness of God's presence and a continuous conversation with Him. You start to notice opportunities for prayer in the midst of your regular activities. A co-worker's mention of a struggle becomes a prompt to pray for them silently. A beautiful sunset becomes a moment of gratitude and worship. A difficult decision becomes an opportunity to seek God's wisdom in real time. This integration of prayer into the fabric of your daily life is what the Apostle Paul meant when he instructed believers to pray without ceasing. He wasn't suggesting that we should spend every waking moment in formal prayer, but that we should live in such constant awareness of God's presence that prayer becomes as natural as breathing. I met a construction worker named Miguel, who had developed this kind of integrated prayer life in the most unlikely setting. Working on loud, chaotic job sites, surrounded by co-workers who had no interest in spiritual things, Miguel had learned to maintain an ongoing conversation with God throughout his workday. While operating heavy machinery, he would pray for safety for himself and his crew. When facing challenging problems with building projects, he would ask God for wisdom and creativity. When conflicts arose between workers, he would pray for peace and understanding. When he saw beautiful craftsmanship or witnessed the satisfaction of completing a difficult project, he would offer thanks to God for the privilege of meaningful work. Miguel's co-workers began to notice something different about him. He remained calm under pressure when others lost their tempers. He showed unusual kindness to new workers who were struggling to learn their jobs. He demonstrated integrity in situations where cutting corners would have been easy and profitable. Eventually, several of his co-workers began asking Miguel about the source of his peace and strength. This opened doors for conversations about faith that Miguel never could have forced or manufactured. By living his entire workday in conscious dependence on God through prayer, Miguel became a living demonstration of divine strength in a setting where such strength was desperately needed but rarely seen. This is what becomes possible when prayer moves from being something you do to being the foundation for how you live. Your entire life becomes a prayer, an ongoing conversation with the God who loves you, guides you, and wants to strengthen your heart for every challenge and opportunity you encounter. As we continue exploring the depths of what it means to pray first and receive God's strength, I want to address something that might be causing confusion or discouragement for some of you. In our results-oriented culture, we often measure the value of spiritual practices by their immediate, tangible outcomes. We want prayer to work like a spiritual vending machine, where we insert our requests and receive our desired results within a predictable time frame. But divine strength and supernatural peace don't always manifest in the ways we expect or according to our preferred timeline. Sometimes God's strength is most evident not in the removal of difficulties, but in your ability to navigate difficulties with grace. Sometimes His peace is most profound, not when your circumstances are peaceful, but when you maintain inner calm despite external chaos. I think about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego facing the fiery furnace. Their prayer wasn't answered by preventing them from being thrown into the fire. Their deliverance came through God's presence with them in the fire, protecting them from being consumed by flames that should have killed them instantly. Sometimes your prayer for God to strengthen your heart will be answered not by removing the circumstances that feel overwhelming, but by giving you supernatural capacity to handle those circumstances with faith, hope, and love. The strength you receive may not look like the strength you expected, but it will be exactly the strength you need for your particular journey. Let me tell you about a woman named Grace who prayed for years for God to heal her chronic illness that caused daily pain and limited her mobility. She believed deeply in God's power to heal, and she had seen him work miracles in other people's lives. But despite consistent prayer and faith, her physical condition remained unchanged. For a long time, Grace struggled with disappointment and confusion about why God seemed to be silent regarding her desperate prayers for healing. She wondered if she lacked sufficient faith, if there was unconfessed sin in her life, or if God simply didn't care about her suffering. But as Grace continued praying first each morning, focusing not just on her request for physical healing, but on her relationship with God himself, something beautiful began to unfold. While her physical condition remained challenging, her heart was filled with supernatural joy, peace, and purpose that seemed impossible given her circumstances. Grace discovered that her illness, rather than being an obstacle to meaningful life, had become a platform for demonstrating God's strength in weakness. People were drawn to her inexplicable joy and peace, despite constant pain. She became a source of encouragement to others facing chronic illnesses, showing them that it was possible to thrive spiritually, even when struggling physically. Eventually, Grace started a support group for people with chronic conditions, teaching them how to find strength and purpose in the midst of ongoing challenges. She wrote a book about discovering God's grace in suffering that helped thousands of people worldwide. She became a sought-after speaker at conferences and retreats, sharing her testimony of how God's strength is made perfect in weakness. The healing Grace received wasn't the physical healing she had originally requested, but it was healing nonetheless. Her heart was healed from bitterness and despair. Her spirit was healed from the lie that her worth was determined by her physical capabilities. Her purpose was clarified and amplified in ways that wouldn't have been possible if her original prayer had been answered according to her expectations. Grace's story illustrates a profound truth about divine strength that we must understand if we want to pray first, with realistic expectations and genuine faith. God's strength isn't always demonstrated by changing our circumstances to match our preferences. Sometimes His strength is most gloriously displayed by changing us to reflect His character, regardless of our circumstances. This doesn't mean we should stop praying for specific needs or that God doesn't care about our practical concerns. It means recognizing that God sees a bigger picture than we can perceive, and His answers to our prayers are always designed to accomplish His highest purposes for our lives and for His kingdom. When you pray first with this understanding, you're freed from the burden of trying to convince God to see things from your perspective. Instead, you can focus on positioning your heart to receive whatever God wants to give you, trusting that His gifts are always better than anything you could have requested or imagined. This trust becomes the foundation for supernatural peace that remains steady regardless of what's happening around you. When you know that God is working all things together for your good, even the things that don't feel good in the moment, you can rest in His sovereignty instead of being anxious about outcomes you can't control. Let me share something with you about the nature of divine timing that has brought me tremendous peace in my own journey of prayer and trust. We live in a microwave culture that expects instant results, but God often works according to what I call crock-pot timing. His purposes unfold slowly, steadily, over months and years, rather than minutes and hours. This slower timing isn't because God lacks power or urgency, but because He's accomplishing multiple purposes simultaneously through every situation. He's not just addressing your immediate need, He's also developing your character, strengthening your faith, preparing you for future opportunities, and often using your circumstances to impact other people in ways you may never fully understand this side of heaven. I remember a young man named Joshua who prayed desperately for a job after graduating from college with significant student debt and no immediate prospects for employment. Month after month, he sent out resumes, went on interviews, and received rejection letters. He began to wonder if God had forgotten about his needs or if he was being punished for some unknown sin. During this difficult season of waiting, Joshua's faith was tested and refined in ways that wouldn't have been possible if he had received immediate employment. He learned to trust God's provision day by day, often not knowing where his next meal would come from. He discovered the generosity of his church community as people offered help and encouragement. He developed deeper relationships with family members as he moved back home and contributed to household responsibilities. Most significantly, Joshua's extended season of unemployment gave him time to volunteer at a local non-profit organization that served homeless individuals and families. This experience opened his eyes to needs he had never noticed and gifts he didn't know he possessed. When Joshua finally received a job offer, it wasn't in the field he had originally pursued or with the salary he had hoped to earn. But the position was with a non-profit organization focused on homelessness prevention, directly related to the passion he had discovered during his volunteer work. Years later, Joshua realized that if he had received immediate employment after graduation, he would have missed the calling that gave his life profound meaning and purpose. The delay that felt like rejection was actually God's preparation for something better than Joshua had originally envisioned for his future. This is often how divine timing works in our lives. What feels like delay or denial may actually be preparation and protection. The strength you develop while waiting for God's timing is often more valuable than the thing you're waiting for. When you pray first and learn to trust God's timing, you discover that His schedule is always perfect, even when it doesn't align with your preferences or expectations. You develop the kind of patient endurance that enables you to persevere through long seasons of uncertainty without losing hope or faith. This patient endurance becomes a testimony to others who are struggling with their own seasons of waiting. When people see you maintaining peace and trust despite unanswered prayers or delayed breakthroughs, they witness a demonstration of supernatural strength that points them toward the source of your stability. Now, let me address something that might be creating internal resistance as you consider committing to pray first consistently. Many people struggle with what I call prayer guilt, the feeling that their prayers aren't good enough, long enough, eloquent enough, or spiritual enough to be often stems from comparing themselves worthy of God's attention. This guilt to others who seem to have more developed prayer lives, or from unrealistic expectations about what prayer should sound like or accomplish. But here's the truth that can set you free from prayer guilt. God doesn't evaluate your prayers based on their sophistication or duration. He listens to your heart, not your vocabulary. The most powerful prayers are often the simplest ones, offered from places of genuine need and humble dependence. God, I need help. Lord, I don't know what to do. Father, please give me strength. These brief, honest prayers can move heaven just as effectively as elaborate, lengthy pet petitions filled with theological language. I think about the tax collector in Jesus' parable who simply beat his chest and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." Jesus said this man went home justified rather than the Pharisee who offered a lengthy, impressive prayer filled with religious language but lacking in genuine humility and dependence on God. Your Heavenly Father isn't impressed by flowery language or lengthy dissertations about your spiritual insights. He's moved by authentic hearts that recognize their need for Him. He's drawn to childlike faith that approaches Him with simple trust rather than sophisticated arguments. This truth should liberate you to pray naturally, conversationally, honestly. You can talk to God like you would talk to a loving parent who cares deeply about every aspect of your life. You can share your fears without embarrassment, express your doubts without condemnation, ask for help without shame. Let me tell you about a grandmother named Betty, who had always felt intimidated by prayer because she compared herself to the pastor's wife at her church, who seemed to have a direct line to heaven and always knew exactly the right thing to pray in every situation. Betty felt like her own prayers were clumsy and inadequate by comparison. When Betty's grandson was diagnosed with autism, she found herself in desperate need of God's strength and guidance, but she felt paralyzed by her perceived inadequacy in prayer. Finally, in complete desperation one morning, she simply began talking to God like she would talk to her closest friend. "God, I don't know how to pray about this situation, but my grandson needs help and I don't know what to do. I'm scared for his future. I'm worried about my daughter who's overwhelmed trying to care for him. I feel helpless and I need you to show up because I'm completely out of my depth here." That simple, honest prayer marked the beginning of a relationship with God that transformed Betty's life. She discovered that God wasn't looking for perfect prayers but for a perfect heart, a heart perfectly surrendered to His love and care. As Betty continued praying simply and honestly each morning, she began to see God's faithfulness in ways she had never noticed before. Resources appeared for her grandson's care. Her daughter found strength she didn't know she possessed. The family drew closer together through their shared challenges. Most importantly, Betty discovered that her inadequate prayers were actually deeply meaningful to God because they came from a place of authentic need and genuine faith, She learned that the effectiveness of prayer isn't measured by its eloquence, but by its sincerity. This understanding can revolutionize your approach to prayer and eliminate the performance pressure that keeps many people from developing a consistent prayer life. You don't need to sound spiritual or use religious vocabulary. You just need to be real with the God who already knows your heart better than you know it yourself. Another barrier that prevents many people from experiencing the full benefits of praying first is what I call results anxiety, the tendency to constantly evaluate whether prayer is working based on immediate visible outcomes. This anxiety can actually interfere with the peace and trust that prayer is meant to cultivate. When you approach prayer with a demanding attitude, constantly checking to see if God is responding according to your timeline and preferences, you miss the deeper work that God wants to do in your heart through the process of prayer itself. Prayer changes you, even when it doesn't immediately change your circumstances. The act of consistently bringing your concerns to God, surrendering your worries to His care, and aligning your heart with His will creates internal transformations that are often more valuable than the external changes you originally requested. Think of prayer like physical exercise. When you start working out, you don't see immediate dramatic changes in your body, but important things are happening beneath the surface. Your cardiovascular system is strengthening. Your muscles are developing, your endurance is increasing. The visible results come later, but the hidden benefits begin immediately. Similarly, when you pray first consistently, important spiritual developments are occurring even when you can't see obvious external results. Your faith is deepening, your trust is growing, your character is being formed, your spiritual sensitivity is increasing. These internal changes create a foundation of strength that will support you through future challenges and opportunities. They develop in you the kind of spiritual maturity that enables you to handle whatever life brings with grace, wisdom, and peace. I remember meeting a woman named Patricia who had been praying faithfully for her marriage for over 2 years without seeing significant improvement in her relationship with her husband. She was beginning to wonder if prayer was pointless and if she should give up on both prayer and her marriage. During our conversation, Patricia mentioned almost casually that people had been commenting on how much more patient and peaceful she seemed recently. Her co-workers had noticed that she didn't get stressed by workplace conflicts the way she used to. Her children had told her that she was more fun to be around than she had been in years. As we talked further, Patricia began to realize that her prayers for her marriage had been answered, just not in the way she expected. Instead of changing her husband, God had been changing her. Instead of fixing her marriage overnight, God had been equipping her with the character qualities that would eventually contribute to healing in her relationship. Within 6 months of our conversation, Patricia's husband began commenting on the positive changes he saw in her and asking what had made the difference. This opened doors for conversations about faith, forgiveness, and the possibility of working together to rebuild their marriage. The transformation Patricia had been praying for did eventually happen, but it began with the transformation God had been working in her heart through months of faithful prayer. Her marriage was healed not through divine intervention that magically eliminated all their problems, but through the supernatural strength and love that God had developed in Patricia's character. This is often how God answers our prayers for changed circumstances, by first changing us in ways that make us capable of handling those circumstances differently or contributing to their improvement through our transformed responses. When you understand this principle, you can pray with confidence even when you don't see immediate external results. You can trust that God is always working, always answering, always strengthening your heart for whatever He has planned for your future. This trust becomes the foundation for supernatural peace that doesn't depend on your ability to see or understand what God is doing. You can rest in His faithfulness, even when His methods and timing don't match your expectations. Let me share with you one final truth about praying first that brings together everything we've discussed and points toward the ultimate purpose of divine strength in your life. The strength that God provides through prayer isn't meant to be hoarded or used only for your personal benefit. It's meant to overflow from your life into the lives of others, creating a ripple effect of hope, healing, and transformation. When your heart is strengthened by consistent communion with God, you become a source of strength for your family, your friends, your community, and everyone whose life intersects with yours. People begin to notice something different about how you handle pressure, how you respond to criticism, how you navigate challenges and setbacks. This difference creates curiosity, and opens doors for conversations about the source of your strength. Without trying to manufacture witnessing opportunities or force spiritual conversations, you naturally become a living testimony to the reality of God's power and love. I think about a teacher named Michelle, who worked in an inner-city school where violence, poverty, and hopelessness were daily realities for most of her students. When Michelle began praying first each morning, asking God to fill her with His strength and love for her students, something beautiful began to happen in her classroom. Students who were accustomed to dealing with stress through aggression began to feel safe enough to express their emotions in healthier ways. Children who had learned not to trust adults began to open up about their struggles and fears. Parents who had given up hope for their children's future began to see possibilities they hadn't imagined. Michelle's classroom became known throughout the school as a place of peace and hope in the midst of chaos. Other teachers began asking her for advice about handling difficult students and stressful situations. Administrators noticed that disciplinary problems were significantly lower in her classes, despite serving some of the most challenging students in the school. The transformation wasn't due to any special teaching techniques or classroom management strategies that Michelle had learned. It was the result of divine strength flowing through her into the lives of her students, creating an atmosphere of love, acceptance, and hope that many of them had never experienced before. Several of Michelle's former students, now adults, have told her that her classroom was the first place they ever felt truly valued and believed in. Some credit their time with her as the turning point that helped them break cycles of poverty and violence in their own families. This multiplication effect is one of the most beautiful aspects of receiving strength from God through prayer. When you're operating from divine resources rather than human limitations, you have more to give, not less. Your capacity for love, patience, kindness, and service actually increases the more you pour out for others. This is the ultimate purpose of the strength that God wants to pour into your heart through prayer, not just to help you feel better or handle your own challenges more effectively, though those are certainly blessed byproducts. The ultimate purpose is to make you a vessel, through which God's love and power can flow into a world that desperately needs both. When you commit to praying first and allowing God to strengthen your heart, you're not just changing your own life, you're potentially changing the lives of countless others who will be impacted by the overflow of divine strength in your life. You're becoming part of God's strategy for healing and hope in a broken world. This understanding elevates prayer from being a personal spiritual discipline to being an act of service to humanity. Every morning that you choose to seek God first, you're positioning yourself to be a conduit of His love and strength to everyone you encounter throughout that day. The strength you receive through prayer becomes strength for your spouse when they're struggling with doubt or discouragement. It becomes patience for your children when they're learning and growing through mistakes. It becomes compassion for your co-workers when they're dealing with personal struggles. It becomes hope for your neighbors when they're facing difficult circumstances. You may never know the full impact of the divine strength that flows through your life into the lives of others. A word of encouragement offered from a heart strengthened by prayer might be exactly what someone needs to keep going through a dark season. A demonstration of peace in the midst of crisis might plant seeds of faith in someone who's never considered the possibility of relationship with God. This is why learning to pray first and receive God's strength is not just about personal spiritual growth, though that's certainly important. It's about becoming the kind of person through whom God can work to bring light into darkness, hope into despair, and love into places where love has been absent. As we prepare to conclude our time together, I want you to imagine the person you could become 6 months from now if you committed to this practice of praying first. Picture yourself handling stress with supernatural calm, responding to difficult people with divine love, making decisions from a place of wisdom rather than fear. Envision your relationships characterized by patience and kindness rather than reactivity and selfishness. See yourself as a source of strength and encouragement to others, rather than someone who needs constant encouragement and support. Imagine going to sleep each night with a sense of peace and purpose, knowing that you've lived that day in partnership with God, empowered by His strength, guided by His wisdom, filled with His love. This isn't an impossible dream or unrealistic fantasy. This is the life that becomes available when you learn to draw your strength from the source that never runs dry, never fails, never abandons you in your time of need. The choice is before you. The invitation has been extended. The strength you need is available right now in this very moment. through the simple but powerful practice of prayer. Friend, your heart doesn't have to remain weak. Your spirit doesn't have to stay overwhelmed. Your peace doesn't have to be held hostage by circumstances beyond your control. The moment you choose to pray first, everything shifts. Not eventually, not gradually, but immediately, you tap into strength that transforms how you face every single day. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, you have a choice that will determine the trajectory of your entire life. You can reach for your phone and fill your mind with chaos, or you can reach for your Father and fill your heart with His power. That choice, repeated day after day, becomes the difference between surviving and thriving, between existing and truly living. Your strengthened heart is one prayer away. Your transformed life begins the moment you decide that God's strength matters more than your own. The invitation is open, the power is available, and your breakthrough starts now. Will you pray first today?